One of the other stories today, and this kind of just came out of nowhere, Chris Vanini from The Athletic. The AAC has released a statement from Commissioner Mike Aresco railing against the Power 5 label, saying the real gap is the top two. He's also not happy about P5 conferences working on their own NIL legislative approach. There are 10 FBS conferences. So here are some of the quotes from Mike Aresco, the American Conference Commissioner. How could the American have been to the Final Four, an Elite Eight, multiple Sweet 16s, have had a college football team in the playoff? How could the American currently be home to the #1 men's basketball team in the country? At this moment in history, separating conferences with a so-called Power 5 moniker lacks meaning in the context of competitiveness. Last part of what he said, and we're taking part of what he said, 5 American Athletic Conference schools were once BCS or Southwest Conference teams. If the difference is so vast, why does the American have 4 New Year's Day football wins over top 10 teams and dozens of regular season football wins against the labeled Power 5?
Nothing he's saying is not true. I mean, it's all true. I mean, it against the eye of the beholder. One thing I do agree with is that, calling yourself the Power 5 is probably a little inappropriate when you have teams inside Power 5 leagues so upset about their money that they're trying to get out of 13-year-long grant of rights things or trying to challenge that. So if you guys are so well off, for example, if the ACC is so much better off than the AAC, then why do they have teams squawking right now? Why did all this stuff have to happen? Yeah, he's right. There's a bigger gap between the Big Ten and the SEC than there is between the ACC and the Pac-12 and the Big 12 and the AAC. So, yeah, that's the issue. And if his point is, there's a Power 2, but there's 8 other conferences. If we kind of banded together, maybe this alliance could get something done. That makes sense. But Mike Aresco's been fighting that fight for a long time. But I do feel like he's probably just going to be screaming into the void because you've got big money schools that don't have any interest in helping the AAC be relevant.
Yeah, I mean, I understand where he's coming from, and I'd imagine he's probably the most frustrated college commissioner in the country right now, but it just seems like he is screaming into the void. Like, what do you want us to do? Like, I mean, what I guess change the Power 5 slogan. Okay. I mean, I think we're all in agreement that this is headed towards where it's more of a Power 2, but even if it's a Power 2, you mean to tell me that the Big 12 or the ACC or the Pac-12 don't still have a pretty considerable little margin in between them and the remaining other conferences?
Well, what is the gap that everyone looks at? It's financial, right?
Right, yeah.
And so it's a huge gap between whoever is 5.
And this also has to do with not just a label, although you can, disagree and squabble over the label, but all right, Mike, let's not call it the Power 5. Let's call it what it is, the Autonomy 5. Okay, now what? Because there is an Autonomy 5. There are 5 conferences. That's what Mack Rhoades calls it. Yeah. I think that's why he's always been intentional in calling it that, the Autonomy 5 rather than the Power 5, because they are the 5 conferences who have a bit more say as far as the rules making and those things. And so that's where the term, as far as the 5 together, that's where that term comes from, is just that they have a little more sway, so to speak, without getting into all the details of how all that works and operates. I don't think it's really been so much about the financial. I mean, it is about the financial, but I don't think it's been so much about like anything other than that. To me, at least, that's where that's always originated, was the Autonomy 5. But for some reason, somebody called it the Power 5 because I guess having say in legislation means you have a little bit more power. Well, that still makes sense. I can understand on his end where it's a little bit disrespectful, I suppose. But yeah, I don't know what he's aiming to accomplish outside of just a name change. And I guess with a name change, then the schools that are still remaining in the American are basically blended in with the majority of the rest of the country. But I'm sorry, I don't see the remaining AAC on the same level as Florida State or Oregon or Texas Tech or some of these other non-Power 2 schools. I just don't. I think there's still a financial gap. I think there's also the autonomy gap. And, I get it, but I just don't know that a name change really changes the basis of where that that kind of all comes from to begin with.
Well,
So
his job is to fight for his
Oh, I
conference.
know.
Yeah.
I understand that.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I agree with what both of you have said. His job is to fight for his conference, just like he was attempting to do when Texas and Oklahoma story broke. Remember when there was, well, maybe the ESPN's trying to sugarcoat things for the American Conference, and all of a sudden Bowlesby got involved, and that ended very quickly.
And there's more to it. Like he talked about how, apparently they uncovered legislation about NIL that hadn't been shared with the other schools. And so that from that standpoint, I'm understanding of it. It just, the way that he kind of delivered it is like, I don't know. I'm sorry. There is a gap, but there is. And to say that there's not is kind of silly. But maybe that gap is narrower than it's been. And, his frustrations, his conference has been raided over, and it's been dismantled seemingly overnight. And now there's the threat of what is the Pac-12 going to come grab Tulane next? Like, what else is out there that's potentially a threat? Is SMU now out as well? I mean, you look at that potential of teams that they've,
well, they've
maybe lost.
What are the three best football teams in the American Conference? Cincinnati.
Yeah.
Right? Houston is in that mix.
Yep.
Who else would
UCF.
be a plus?
UCF.
And UCF. There you go. Yeah.
But then you add in Tulane, who just had the best season, and there's at least scuttlebutt that, maybe they'd be up next. And SMU, who's also been one of their better teams. So it's like, yeah, if you're him, you're probably freaking out right now and trying to find your place in this ever-changing world, just like the Autonomy 5 guys are trying to figure out their place in the world as well. So, yeah, I mean, maybe everybody uses different language. It's Power 2 rather than Power 5, but I'll just say Autonomy 5 then, and problem solved.
All right, let's break.